Welcome, everybody. We're really delighted that you didn't have to schlep out on a cold, wintry night, and we're welcoming people from Melbourne, from Sydney, from all over Australia, and several people from overseas. And we're really pleased to happily be able to leave COVID behind and actually venture out of here and go to New York. We're speaking to you from Paran, from on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their huge contribution to country and culture. What we're going to be doing today is to take you on a journey of several trips that we've been on to New York. Not all the galleries that we've been to today. We went to in one particular blast. And I have to say that Charles and I are both dilettantes in a lot of this area, so the views that are expressed are very much ours, not of the institutions. And we hope that you enjoy what we've chosen to enjoy from to New York.
We're going to now go to New York. A hell of a town, or New York, New York. And for many people, New York is regarded as the center of the universe, especially for New Yorkers. But it is a sort of major city, particularly when it comes to culture, when it comes to finance, and also when it comes to media. It is a big city. There's over 20 million people living in greater New York, and it's one of the biggest cities in the world. And in addition to that, it's got some idiosyncrasies which are unique to New York. 3.5 of those million of those people are actually weren't born in the US. So I think it's the first city in the world to have such a high proportion of non-born residents. And as a consequence, someone calculated that there are 800 languages spoken in New York. So New York is really just a wonderfully cosmopolitan and diverse city, and there's a lot happening there. We talked about finance. They have, I think, a GMP of $2 trillion. And if New York was a separate country, it'd be the 8th biggest economy in the world. And in addition to that, they have over 65 million tourists a year. So there's a lot happening in New York. And every time Leah and I have been there, which has been quite a few times because we've got some close friends who live there who we visit, it's always a challenge as to what to do and what to see, not because there's not enough, but because there's too much. So whether it's going to the theatre or to music or to seeing the sights or even travelling out of New York. What we're going to do here is we're going to actually focus on the art. Now, when it comes to art, New York is one of the top cities in the world, not necessarily from a creative point of view. It was considered the top city straight after the war when abstract expressionism took hold, and then pop art, and things are really happening. So from a creative point of view, some people will argue that some other cities are sort of giving New York a run for its money. But in terms of arts activity, it is really out there. Like New York has over 1,000 galleries to visit. In addition to that, there's over 70 museums, and they have over 30 art fairs. And I believe that of the 10 highest purchases of art that occurred in the world, all of them took place in New York. So what we thought, we would give you some idea of the lay of the land. We're going to visit 25 museums and galleries on our tour today, and which is a lot of ground to cover. And just to give you an idea as to where they're located, they are actually concentrated in certain districts or pockets. And so we have the Upper East Side where some of the major museums are located, and the Upper East Side is a sort of the chichi area of New York.
And that's the Museum Mile.
And that's the Museum Mile, that's true. And then you have Midtown, which is the commercial center of New York, and that's where the auction houses are located. And then you have Chelsea on the west side, which used to be a sort of a downbeat area, but it was discovered by artists, and a lot of the major galleries are located there. And then you have the Bowery and the Lower East Side, which is also a sort of poorer side of New York, where a lot of museums and galleries and artists are moving to because it's cheaper to to operate there. We'll also be going outside of Manhattan, so we'll be going to Queens and then further on to Long Island to see a museum there, and then we'll also be going to the Hudson Valley. Now, what we're going to do is to start off with the major museums, and Leah's going to start with the Metropolitan. So we're going to skim over these 4 big museums, and we're actually going to focus more on the smaller museums and the more offbeat sites. So I'll hand over to you, Leah.
But you cannot visit New York and not visit the Met. It's the largest art museum in New York. In the United States, it's got a permanent collection of over 2 million works divided amongst 17 curatorial departments. It's been featured in films, is now the backdrop, the facade for the Met Gala, the major fundraising event that happens there. It's one of those iconic kind of places. Its genesis is interesting. After the Civil War, there was this move by people to actually restore this sort of ideals of the Enlightenment back to the people. And so, unlike very many European major galleries, the Met was not founded on the back of a royal collection. It was actually founded on private bequests and funding. And I think it talks to that extraordinary, no matter what we think about America today, there's an extraordinary tradition of art philanthropy that's underscored many of the museums that actually exist in New York and in America today. This particular museum, you could spend a week there. The central slide is a temple of Dendor. It's 2,000 years old. It's the largest extant Egyptian temple that you could ever see, and they've built this entire room around it. I mean, just to go in there diminishes you in a wonderful way. And of course, they've been major collectors of European art, of Degas, of Manet, of Picasso, and so many of the rooms are dedicated to those. And New Yorkers are very well known for their plaque disease, so every room has a particular donor and a funder. And as much as I often sort of scoff at that, I think, isn't it fantastic that people are prepared to commit to supporting the arts? It's really quite a wonderful thing. So you cannot go to New York and not visit.
So you can imagine what this talk is like. This was skimming over. So
Sorry.
one of the things we do need to point out is that America is quite different to Australia and Europe when it comes to their museums, because in Australia and Europe, the government plays a big role in the founding and support of museums, whereas in the States, the vast majority of museums are actually being privately founded and privately supported, and that's why currently they are being hit by COVID, because quite a large bit of revenue comes from ticket sales, and it's quite expensive to go to museums in America. They can cost from anything up to $15, $20 or $25 US per person, so it's a bit of an impost, but for what you get for your money, like you can stay there the whole day, and I think the Museum of Modern Art is similar to the Met. It is just a gigantic museum, and similar to the Met, it was also privately founded by John D. Rockefeller's wife, and I think their main focus was that they wanted to have a museum that actually represented modern and contemporary art, and it
that was European modernism. It wasn't.
It was European modernism. That's right. So it actually opened in 1929, 9 days after the Wall Street crash, and not the best time to actually open a non-for-profit. Well, I suppose no one made a profit after the crash, but it grew significantly. It's interesting. Glenn Lowry, who's the current director of MoMA, came to Melbourne when the NGV had an exhibition, and I went to one of his lectures, and he said that when MoMA was started, its original plan was to sell their collection after 20 years, so they could then invest that money in buying the contemporary art of the day. But he said that after they came to all their Picassos and Matisses and Van Goghs, they couldn't actually come around to selling them. So as a consequence, their collection has grown significantly, and so has the museum. So I think they've gone through 4 major or 5 major extensions, and recently they did one which was quite controversial, which they actually acquired the Folk Museum next door, and extended it out. So we haven't seen the latest extension, but they have over 200,000 works in their collection and over 65,000 square meters of space. So it is huge. And
one of the things that we usually do when we go there was race up to the 5th floor where Monet's lilies are. But who knows whether that's still actually located there now that they've changed their building. But often a good idea not to start on the bottom of any particular major museum. So Solomon Guggenheim, the uncle of the very fabled Peggy Guggenheim, was, well, he set up his museum of non-objective painting in 1938. And he had an eccentric art collection. And really when he showed his works at that time, many people had their first view of a Vasily Kandinsky kind of work. In 1943, he appointed Frank Lloyd Wright to design this iconic building. Frank Lloyd Wright, it's the only museum he's ever designed. He wanted, Guggenheim wanted a showcase for his works by Picasso, Klee and Miro. It opened in 1959. Neither Solomon Guggenheim and Frank Lloyd Wright were alive at that particular day. I'm not sure if that says something about the building process, but in fact, this is a radical departure from the typical museum layout and from every other building in New York for that matter. It's iconic. I mean, anyone, and many of you will have been to New York, it's such a recognizable building. And it really is a monument to modernism. The circular concrete structure stands in stark contrast to the rectangular steel and glass buildings that are sort of on either side of it. And inside there's a central ramp which spirals upwards and outwards from one exhibition floor to the next. And it creates this open interior space that's flooded with daylight and that pours in through a glass dome. Even before it opened, the design polarized architecture critics. Some believed that the building would overshadow the museum's artworks, and critics and many artists felt that it was awkward to properly hang paintings in these shallow, windowless, concave exhibition niches. Prior to the opening, 21 artists signed a letter protesting about the display of their work in such a space. But Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright, as many of you will know, was I think he regarded himself as his own kind of god, and he allotted paintings and sculptures only to have as much space as wouldn't infringe upon his abstract composition. So he created a shell whose form has no relation to function and offered no possibility of any future departure from its rigid preconceptions. Anyway, it's actually was opened despite the earlier criticism in 1959 and is now clearly a World Heritage listed building and a New York landmark. And today it's the permanent home of a continuously expanding collection of Impressionist, post-Impressionist and early modern and contemporary art, and it features special exhibitions through the year. The best way to experience it is to head up to the 5th floor and just walk your way down.
Yeah, skateboard down.
Skateboard down. There are 5 other Guggenheims in the world today, in New York, Bilbao, Venice, Abu Dhabi and Berlin. And it's become a branding kind of exercise, I think, as much as anything else. But we have to thank him for his philanthropy too.
But it is, architecturally, it is an amazing space. It doesn't really work all that well as a gallery.
Darling, I think I just said that.
Yeah, but I was confirming it.
Thank you. Okay. No, we've got too much to go through.
Because we don't agree architecturally on anything, and this is one of the few things we do agree on.
Okay, and the Frick is as grand as it gets. It's set in the 5th Avenue former mansion home of a millionaire industrialist, Henry Clay Frick, who is really uber rich. He owned Carnegie Steel. I think he was worth in 1919 something like the equivalent of $19.3 billion. The holdings, or the Frick's holdings, are packed with art history 101, old masters, opulent furniture, rare decorative arts, textiles, sculpture, ceramics. It wasn't, he didn't want it opened until after he died, until after he or his wife died. His wife died in 1935. And it really is home now to one of the finest European collections of paintings in the United States. What's great about it, I think, though, is that, in fact, when you enter it into it, the slide on the lower right-hand side shows you the way it was when he lived in it. So it's not artwork that's been set up in periods, as you will often see in a regular gallery. It's actually a domestic, but it's his domestic settings. So, and at that time, if you're a wealthy collector, the center of your art world was Paris, and it's really reflected in the collection. It's a really wonderful opportunity to go and see how the uber rich live. Currently, it's being renovated and works are on display in the Brewer Building on Madison Avenue. But it really is like, it's a house museum par excellence.
Yeah, the only thing about the Frick is they don't serve egg sandwiches. So So all these museums that we just saw were in the Upper East Side, and you can see it's a sort of where all the mansions are, and the Jewish Museum is also located in that locale, and it's in a mansion as well. It was founded in 1904, and it's one of the earliest museums of its genre in the United States and even in the world. So in 1944, this building was donated to the Jewish Museum where they could set up, and like many Jewish museums, they have a sort of multi-dimensional purpose. One is to tell the story of Jewish civilization, and you can see in the bottom left-hand slide some of the artifacts they have to tell that story. But they also have quite an extensive collection of over 30,000 items, including quite an extensive art collection, which you can see in the bottom middle slide. If you're looking for Judaica, it's a great place to see some special works in their gift shop, but probably the crowning glory is in fact the cafe. Now, you can't be Jewish without having a decent cafe, and what they did here is that they actually got one of the major delis in New York to open up there. So this is so famous that I can't forget it. It's
Russ and Daughters.
Russ and Daughters, and you can see Leah honing into what she can't quite remember what she was
All
eating.
I know is it's probably coronary artery blocking, and I don't think they ever serve salad there, ever.
Yeah, but you can see on the background they've got schmaltz herring and all the sort of classic dishes. So, one of the things that's really worth going to is the changing exhibition. So they have major retrospectives. So like on the top left-hand slide, they had a retrospective of Chagall's work. So many artists who happen to be Jewish and the contribution that they make to the wider world. They also have changing exhibitions which explore the Jewish identity, like the bottom left-hand slide. And you also have, when we were there, they had this fantastic exhibition on Burl Marx, who was a designer and landscape architect in Brazil, very famous for a lot of the landscaping in Rio. And it was just an eye-opener because I'd never heard of him, and just to be introduced to somebody like that who just happened to be Jewish. And previously on other visits, we went to a changing exhibition on Eva Hesse, who is a very famous artist in America. And on the right-hand slide, you can see a series of fabric samples. And this was an exhibition also that was on at the same time on Isaac Mizrahi, quite a well-known fashion designer. So well worth a visit, especially for their changing exhibitions and to go to Russ and Daughters. Okay, so further down the street is the Cooper Hewitt. This is the one and only major design museum in the United States. It started life quite early in 1846, which is quite a long time ago. And why it's called the Cooper Hewitt and the Smithsonian is sort of a reflection on its history. Originally, the Cooper Union was a major private college which taught art, architecture, and engineering. And the Hewitts, who were actually the granddaughters of Cooper, wanted to set up a design museum in the somewhere, and they convinced the Cooper Union to set aside one of the floors to set up the museum, which they did. And but unfortunately, both institutions had sort of diverging agendas, and in I think 1960s they sort of parted company. So then the Cooper Hewitt was formed in a building that was donated to them by Andrew Carnegie. So that's the mansion that you see there, in the Upper East Side, and they set up a design museum there. So one of the advantages there is that the design museum is also looking at both historic design and also contemporary design. And one of the beautiful things about this facility is you get this mixing of the mix of the old and the new, and you can see that from the slides here. So you can see the sort of classic heritage fit out of the building itself, juxtaposed against the contemporary displays and reception desks, and even high-tech. Seb Chen, who is an Australian, actually went to work for the Cooper Hewitt and introduced a sort of digital infrastructure for people to be able to actually track their visit. So you can see on the bottom right-hand corner this interactive screen where people can engage not only with the exhibits, but can also track their visit there.
And when we were there were scores of school kids around.
That's right. So it provides both the sort of expansive idea, and they also have changing exhibitions there as well. So, and you can see on the bottom right-hand corner slide, there's Leah in that sort of cellular structure, which was part of the exhibition they had on the cellular components of contemporary design, as you can see in the bottom middle slide. They have also a beautiful, we saw in the previous slide, garden at the rear, and so you can actually relax there on a beautiful day and have some a break with the cafe that they have.
Okay, the Noy Gallery on Fifth Avenue is Ronald Lauder, Estee Lauder's son's great gift to New York. If you love going into the homes of the rich and famous, this is one of the places you need to go. It's a jewel box of a museum, a former Gilded Age Beaux-Arts brownstone mansion, which was completed in 1914. It's on the Upper East Side, and it was the former home of Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt III. Sounds like a movie, kind of like strange. Anyway, the museum opened in 2001. It's the perfect backdrop for the works, much of which were created during the time in that 1914, 1920 kind of period when this building was actually created. The cafe on the left-hand side is...
You're going to talk about the secession.
I'm going to. The cafe is an actually wonderful step back in time. It could even be, if you had no other interest, it's worth going there just for the Sachertorte and the Apfelstrudel. It's very much the Austrian Viennese tradition, because that's the artworks that are actually being championed in this particular museum. It's dedicated entirely to 19th century German and Austrian art and design, with a collection that spans painting and furniture, sculpture, photography, and manuscripts. On the top right-hand side, you can see some works by Egon Schiele and Oskar Kokoschka, I think that one is. And on the lower left and right corners, there are works that actually represent the Vienna Workshop, this extraordinary sort of school of design and decorative arts that had people like Joseph Hoffmann, who's also represented in the NGV here. Architects Adolf Loos, Otto Wagner are also really well represented. So it's really paying homage to a period that's got nothing to do. You walk in there and America just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think the Vienna at that time, which was capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was really, from a art and design point of view, a world leader, sort of like almost like the New York of Europe at that time, and amazing work, which this museum is trying to present, encapsulate in their presentations.
So the star attraction here arguably is Gustav Klimt's mesmerising and iconic painting, The Portrait of Adele Bloch Bauer, which was completed in 1907. In 2006, Lauder purchased this painting from Maria Altmann on behalf of the Neue Gallery, where it's been on display ever since. And you might recall that painting was the object of a film, The Woman in Gold. The painting returned to its rightful heirs after a long dispute. Citing a confidentiality agreement, Lauder would only confirm that the purchase price was more than the last record price of $104.2 million US, which was paid for Picasso's painting The Boy with a Pipe. The press reported at the time that the Klimt was actually sold for US 135 million, which would make it at the time the most expensive painting ever sold, and it has been on display ever since. The collection of German art, which you can see down on the lower right, includes also there's furniture that you can't see there, but it's furniture by Marcel Breuer and by architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. But the building itself is absolutely exquisite. The staircase that you can see on the upper right-hand side is just an exquisite piece of design. The tile work really meticulously reconstructed, and it's just an extraordinary home. It's an exquisite home. No expense has been spared. I suppose really we have to thank Estee. Well, we have to thank women and their love of makeup, because it's Estee Lauder's fortune that actually allows the makeup of this particular building. So go lipstick.
Yeah. Typical women taking credit for
yeah. Well, listen, a lot of women actually did an awful lot of things with these museums. Okay, you know, when you go to a place like New York, there's so many individually interesting little museums. You know, it can be on trains, and it can be on clocks, and it can be on Native American art. This one was the one we actually happened upon by accident. The museum that we wanted to see, or the gallery we were going to go to, happened to be closed, and we just accidentally tripped into this. It's not a place that many tourists go to, but I can't urge you, if you're in New York again, if ever, wherever, if we can get to Bendigo, if we can get anywhere, if we can get to New York, come and see this. This is extraordinary. It's like a multi-hyphenate millennial. So instead of being an actress / model / influencer / whatever, it's a museum / library / landmark / history site / gallery / music venue. It was originally the public library and the home of a financier, J. Pierpont Morgan, but since its 2000 expansion by Lorenzo Piano, it's more like a mini Madison Avenue campus. So I'm going to get Charles to talk to the plan, but just have a look at the small performing arts space, which would give our recital centre a bit of a run for its money. And this is contained within this building. Charles, do you want to have a schmooze about the...
I think there should be a small correction here.
Really?
After Leah comes home exhausted from the day's sojourn going through all these galleries, I actually sit down and do the research and work out what we're going to see the next day. So
you need to have a muse.
Going to the Morgan wasn't an accident, actually.
I thought that was an accident.
No. It was actually planned.
Oh, God.
You thought it was an accident, yeah. So
like our life.
Yeah, that's right, like the rest of our life. So I refer you to the slide in the bottom middle there. You can see a sort of floor plan and 3 grey buildings. So the one on the left is actually JP Morgan's home, and now it houses the cafe and the gift shop. And on the right-hand side bottom, with the yellow insert, is his own private museum, because he had a major collection, and the top right-hand corner was his own library. So they were connected originally with a sort of series of outbuildings, but they needed a lot more space, so they appointed Lorenzo Piano, who's quite a well-known international architect, who's you'll hear more of in this talk, to actually put an insertion which went down several levels, as you can see in the section, and built some upper levels as well in the center there, to create a lobby or an atrium which actually connected all the buildings together. And this was done in a contemporary fashion, and actually it's a beautiful job. It did really well because it's a sort of like a classic modernism, which, although very contemporary, is quite complementary to the heritage buildings on either side. And you can see in the lobby there's art installations there. And so yeah, actually, as Leah said, there's a lot of diversity with regard to what the offer is with regard to the cultural capacity. So I'll hand you back to Leah.
So in stark contrast to what you just saw, this is inside the multi-millionaire's personal library. It's been expanded into a must-see museum. You'll find rare artifacts, paintings and books, some dating back to 4000 BC, that are worth more than most people's homes. In particular, the museum's home to one of 23 copies of the original Declaration of Independence, the only extant manuscript of Milton's Paradise Lost, and Charles Dickens's manuscript of A Christmas Carol. It's wonderful to think that actually a man of such means, and I suppose men at that time, their taste was reflected in books. And the library is just a sumptuous, extraordinary space. Many tourists don't come here. It's actually mainly visited by New Yorkers, but it really is an entry into another time, another world. But they do also have contemporary exhibitions, as you can see on the right-hand side. So they're not frozen in time, but the time that they are frozen in is pretty damn spectacular.
Okay, so we're coming to something a little bit different here. We've moved away from the Upper East Side, and the Morgan Library was in Midtown, and we've now moved to Chelsea. Chelsea was a sort of pretty downtrodden neighbourhood. I think if you were to compare it to Melbourne, it was sort of like Fitzroy, and so a lot of artists moved there, and Donald Judd actually ended up buying this 5-story building, which you can see in the bottom bottom left-hand corner, and where he set up his home and studio. He was quite well known by that time, and so he had the funds to be able to do that. And as a consequence, a lot of artists and galleries moved there, and now it's probably the centre of sort of contemporary art activity in New York. Donald Judd is one of the most highly regarded minimalist artists in the world. And so you can see examples of his work on the right-hand side. And so not only he started life as a painter, but he actually moved into sculpture, and he also did furniture design and also architecture. He's probably collected in every major museum around the world. And and you can see, just to give you a comparison, the house which has been restored and set up as a foundation to give an idea of how he worked and lived. So the upper middle slide, you compare that to the slide under to get an idea of what the place is like. And this is the house. So in many ways, it's a house museum. Donald Judd also was a big collector of his contemporary artists. So you can see in the bedroom, which is sort of very Zen-like.
Zen-like? It's an orthopedic surgeon's dream.
I doubt that he maybe lived like that. That might be just
oh, God, Joe.
Well,
anyway, sorry.
Some people might like it.
Yes.
You can see there's a light installation by Dan Flavin. I'm not sure who the artists are on the back wall. And in the middle slide above, you can see a major work by Frank Stella. He also commissioned artists to do murals. And he also designed and built the furniture. You can see the dining table in the top left-hand corner and the dining room. And the bottom right-hand 2 slides, you can see 2 of his children who were very active in actually not only setting up not so much setting up the foundation, Judd set up the foundation, but they actually were responsible for having the building restored and set up for visitors. And he's also got another site that he moved to because he worked on large installations, and he just did not have enough room in this facility. So he went to Marfa in Texas, which is in the middle of nowhere, and there's a huge installation there, many buildings, not only of his work, but his contemporaries, which is on our bucket list to visit. And this is all managed out of this building, and you can see in the top right-hand slide where they've got his archives and records of his work. He was also a prolific writer. The first 5 years of his life, he supplemented his income by being an art critic, and his writings are highly regarded, and that's part of the archive that they have there. So let's move on.
In total contrast is the Reuben Museum of Art. This extraordinary museum was set up after a couple in the 1970s happened to be walking down Madison Avenue, and for some reason just were completely besotted by a work of a Tibetan artist. They fell in love with more pieces, and they ended up with a collection spanning 1,500 years of over 3,800 pieces. So in 2004, Shelley and Donald Reuben opened up this museum in an impressive 6-story building that was formerly part of the Barney's department store. So that stair that you can see in that middle slide is part of what you would have normally found in that department store. It's actually an exquisite piece in its own right. The collection is really an unparalleled, comprehensive deep dive into the art of the Himalayas. We're not interested in the art of the Himalayas, or we weren't really interested in, or not interested in that particular period, but it was just wonderful to enter into almost somebody's, to see how a particular collector collects. And that's really what its great appeal for us. But really, when you entered into the space, there was something so serene and calming about it. And it's interesting that the Reubens actually are inspired by the philosophical traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism, and so their exhibitions that they have, apart from the artifacts that they've collected, actually are really talking to that modern interpretation of ancient traditions. So you can see on the top left-hand side, there's a sound booth there. Someone is sitting inside and just making that very meditative sound of Om. but that is recorded, and all the ohms are recorded, and it becomes a soundscape in that particular space. The work on the lower left-hand side, which is a very vibrant neon work, echoes the work that we saw on the previous slide on the right-hand corner, and it's kind of evoking that same tradition of using these iconic kind of images. They have a sixth floor that's devoted very much to the notion of dealing with art and emotion. And this exhibition on the left is called,
the right.
I beg your pardon, on the right is called Hope, Anxiety. And you can see they've got these small little plaques, and people can fill in what it is that they are anxious about. And I love the one that says, I'm anxious because we're building things we don't understand. But anyway.
They obviously didn't have an architect.
Obviously didn't know. And they have what I'm hopeful about. And they invite sort of an interactive kind of process in the exhibition space. So it's just a little curious kind of gem.
That, I think one thing they're exploring is sort of Eastern religious beliefs and philosophies and the way they interact with the Western world. And so this whole idea of mindfulness, which is sort of part of public consciousness today, is the way they integrate that into the artwork that they have on display there. Okay, so also in Chelsea, we have Deer Foundation. The Deer Foundation was set up as a non-for-profit by a German art dealer and an oil heiress, and its purpose was really to support artists through appointment, commissions, and also giving them stipends to support emerging artists, especially the artists in the 60s and 70s who were this group of artists who were practicing both conceptual art, minimalism, abstraction, and conceptual art. So you can see here that they've got these several buildings which were former industrial buildings in Chelsea, which they've actually renovated and amalgamated to create this major centre. So as a result, Deer Foundation have got two sites, one here in Chelsea and another one in Beacon, which is an upstate in the Hudson Valley, which we're going to visit later in this talk. And also the commissions. So they had some major land art commissions, like the Lightning Field by Walter de Maria in New Mexico, and also Robert Smithson Spiral Jetty. I don't know if you're familiar with them. So they also maintain and manage those installations all around America and internationally. And there's another couple in New York, which we'll see in the next slide. So in this particular case, they appointed a French artist called Francois Morrowlette to paint this mural on the side of the building. And on the bottom middle of the slide, you can see an exhibition of his work as part of an exhibition. And you can see that the style of art that they sort of focus on. And so on the top left-hand slide, we have work by an artist called Blinky Palmero, who's actually a German artist by the name of Peter Schwartz. Actually picked that name that was actually based on an American mafioso. So his work is that sort of minimalist geometric abstraction. But recently they've started to promote female abstract artists, which you can see in the bottom left-hand slide, and also this laser work by Rita McBride. In the bottom right-hand corner, this is another installation which they had funded and maintaining. This was actually in the gallery of the founder, and it's called the New York Earth Room. And essentially, the whole gallery space, all 135 square meters of it, was filled with earth. I think 200 cubic meters of earth weighing 130,000 kilometers.
It's completely nuts.
No, it's actually, no, it's 335 square meters. And so what you do is you come into the entry and you see the glass panel there, you stand there and you just look over the earth, and I think
and that's called art.
It is
conceptual art is a wank. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, well,
although, well, you know,
all I can say is the earth didn't move for Leah on this work.
No,
and
absolutely
but
not.
in many ways, what it is, if you're familiar with monochromes, this is basically a conceptual sculptural installation rendition of what a monochrome is, and it's very zen because there's nothing there. You're looking at something natural like the earth, and it's there to contemplate. As they say in Yiddish, in Dret.
So we come to the Whitney, but before we get to the Whitney, the building which you can see, the second on the left, has a forecourt which is the New York High Line. And I'm sure many of you who've been to New York in the last decade would have been to the High Line. It's an extraordinary urban intervention. It was actually instigated by a group of people in 1999 who were quite agitated that Rudy Giuliani was going to actually demolish a section here which was used by freight trains, but it's in the meatpacking district, and I think trains used to take meat. Is that right? And it became disused. No longer it was being that wasn't the sort of mode of transport. And it's a beautifully elevated sort of space, and they felt that it was a wonderful place to create an urban elevated park, and they had to fight really very hard to make it happen. But in fact, it was actually literally a grassroots movement. People actually established this committee and made the thing happen, and it's become an extraordinary attraction. One of the wonderful things that they've done is actually planted vegetation that would have been true to the railway sidings that would have existed there at that time. Its success has actually inspired cities all throughout the United States to use and redevelop obsolete infrastructure, which is a really wonderful thing as a public space. It's become a tourist attraction, and it's really spurred real estate development in the adjacent neighbourhoods, including Chelsea, and it increased real estate values along the whole route. And by 2019, it had 8 million visitors a year. During COVID, they had to close it because, in fact, it really has become almost the victim of its own success because it's such a congested thoroughfare. There's always a sense of festival, a sense of energy, a sense of it feels very touristy. That's my feeling about it now. Because they're just
such a snob.
Yeah, because tourists like me go there. I mean, that's the stupidity of it, isn't it? It has been opened again. And it has currently an operating budget of about 11.5 million. The irony is when the committee wanted to set this up, it was going to cost more to demolish it than to actually preserve it, and it's now become a really major feature. And it's a wonderful way to see that part of New York from an elevated position. So it stands in the forecourt of the Whitney Museum, which you can see with that pink intervention on that wall. So the Whitney's got a really interesting history, and again, it's sort of almost serendipitous the way it actually emerged. It really occurred because a wealthy socialite, sculptor and art collector and patron, Gloria Vanderbilt Whitney, had success with her New York-based exhibition spaces that she operated from 1914 to 1928. And she was promoting the works of avant-garde and unrecognized American artists. And over time, she collected nearly 700 works of American art. In 1929, she offered to donate those works to the Met, but the museum declined the gift because, of course, the museum's focus, being encyclopedic, was very much European-centric. And then this, along with the apparent preference for European modernism at the recently opened MoMA, led Whitney to start her own museum, as you do, and exclusively for American art in 1929. Necessity is the mother of invention, it seems. And so this collection really focuses strongly on 20th and 21st century American art, and it has a permanent collection now of more than 25,000 paintings, videos, prints, photographs, films, and new media by more than 3,500 artists. So it's really provided a wonderful vehicle for many artists. Artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, Mark Rothko, Edward Hopper, really classic, iconic American artists are represented, and modern artists like Basquiat, who in fact got his launch of his career at a Whitney show because they have this wonderful biennial where they show unknown and up-and-coming artists, and that's where he actually got his first leg up, I suppose. an upgrade has occurred here, and I'm going to defer to Charles's rather better architectural wisdom than mine to talk to it.
Okay, so on the bottom left-hand slide is the original Whitney Museum, and this was actually designed by Marcel Breuer, and I think it opened in the 1960s. And this is one of the iconic buildings in architectural modernism. And what's interesting is that the growth of the Whitney outgrew this building, and it was too difficult to actually extend around it, and because this is located in Madison Avenue, so they made the decision to relocate. So this building by Marcel Breuer has previously was actually occupied by the Met for their contemporary art collection, and now it's actually housing the Frick collection while they are renovating their current premises. So they appointed Lorenzo Piano, and he actually radically changed the approach that this museum had to the way it connected to the city. And as you can see, the Breuer building is not unlike the NGV. It's sort of built as a fortress, and it's inward looking, and it doesn't really connect all that much to the city, whereas the Whitney by Lorenzo Piano does the opposite, and it's sort of very transparent, and it's also designed as a reflection of the sort of industrial character of the meatpacking district where this is now located. And so not only is it quite transparent, but it has a lot of external open spaces, which we'll see in the next slide. But in the upper slide, second from the right, you can see the entry piazza. So what's interesting about this building is that it's actually, as you can see in the bottom middle slide, it acts as a sort of connector between the High Line and the Hudson River on the other side. And so it's quite a pivotal position. And so as a sort of piece of urbanism, it's tried very hard to sort of knit into the neighborhood. And on the right-hand side, you can see me standing on the stair. It's interesting, the stairs were actually the main form of circulation to get from one level to the other. And
oh, they do have two artist designed elevators, so they're very slow.
Yeah. But so I'll hand you back to Leah.
So one of the things to do there is you always got to go to a cafe in one of these museums, and the 8th floor cafe is absolutely spectacular. You get these brilliant views that overlook the Hudson, and you can see Manhattan over there across the Hudson River. So there's this, you know, now that with COVID, you know, that sense of being in a space like that and being exposed with lots of people just seems so foreign. But anyway, the artworks that you can see they're in spaces where there are no columns. That it's very much about contemporary art, not only American artists now. I think that television work in the back is by Vietnamese artists.
Korean artists.
Korean artists, Pack, that's right. One of the things to do is to go to the 5th floor. They've got couches everywhere, and just sit down, and you could almost imagine you're staying in your own apartment with this wonderful lush expanse of skyline uninterrupted that you can just enjoy. It's a terrific place to visit, but it really is about cutting edge contemporary American art substantially.
Yeah, and also museums have changed as well. I think museums have become more people focused. So museums now have a lot of sort of performances and activities, and that's where these terraces come in where people can enjoy not only the city itself, but the other activities that take place.
And I remember with the Whitney, they had timed entry to control crowds, but in fact, you could stay on sort of longer. Most places didn't have that, and it was a very interesting feature that they...
Yeah, but you can see from the slides at the bottom there how transparent it is. It's very unusual for traditional museums which are so internally focused to experience the city at the same time that you experience the art. It's terrific, really worth visiting. Okay, so...
the new as opposed to the Noi.
Noi, yeah. So this museum is called the New Museum. It's located in the Bowery, which is, I don't know if you remember the Bowery. The Bowery used to be where all the sort of homeless people and derelict people would go. And so this was actually set up in 1977, or was founded in 1997 by a curator called Marcia Tucker. And what she wanted to do was actually to support artists who had very little recognition or weren't supported by other institutions. And what you find that many of the museums we've seen up till now are sort of the more established traditional museums, albeit that they might collect contemporary or modern art. And these ones are sort of really looking at the sort of cutting edge of artists, which are sort of much more challenging and don't have sort of widespread appeal against collectors. And so nonetheless, they managed to build this $50 million building, and they appointed Sana, the architects. These are the architects who are currently done quite a few international museums, including the Gallery of New South Wales. They're working on their extension. And on the bottom left, you can see that obviously this museum has become very popular, and they are planning to do an extension, which you can see that sort of chamfered building next door, which has been designed by Rem Koolhaas's OMA. So that's in the planning stage at the moment, which I think has probably been cut short by COVID. And similar to the Whitney, you can see they've got this balcony which engages with the outside world. But the demographic, aside from the people you see on the balcony there, it tends to be younger, and so it really operates with a sort of different audience to the other museums. So you can see the art that they have here, a lot of installation art. These are by artists that Leah and I had never heard of when we saw them, and
some of them we didn't want to hear about afterwards.
And yeah, it's sort of really quite challenging work, and there are artists from all over the world, you know, from Asia and Africa and South America, and
that's what you want to do when you go to a museum. You don't want to see same old, same old. Yes.
So what's great about coming here is you see stuff you don't see elsewhere, and so some of it you might not like, but
it just shows you what's happening out there.
But
in the art
every
world.
once in a while you'll see something which will really grab you, and you won't have that opportunity unless you sort of make the effort. Okay, so further towards the Lower East Side is the International Centre of Photography. This was set up in 74 by Colonel Capa. He was the brother of Robert Capa. He was a very famous wartime photographer who unfortunately died on one of his shoots. And so Cornell was, when he set up in the 70s, he was concerned that photography wasn't actually being appreciated and wasn't being preserved and collected. And in particular, sort of photography his brother took, which was sort of socially and politically focused images. And so he started getting a series of compatriots to start making these collections, and they wanted to have a place where this could be displayed and also managed. So and they were been in several buildings historically, and then in 2020 this building designed by Gensler was built. This is part of a larger urban development in the Lower East Side. And you can see that they've got an exhibition on the right-hand side, which is looking at COVID and sort of dealing with a lot of contemporary issues. And so several of these museums we hadn't been to, because some of them are sort of post-dated when we were there last in 2016. And so this is one that we'll be looking to go to when we are next in New York. Who knows when that will be. And this is another one. This is the Brandt Foundation. This is by a collector called Peter Brandt, who's a sort of industrialist, magazine publisher, film producer, and major art collector. And and what's interesting about going to places like this, it's always great to see a private collector's collection. And so he's got two sites, actually. He's got this one here, which is in Chelsea, and another one in Greenwich in Connecticut. And so this one's actually been set up in a former electrical substation. And before Brandt took it over, it was actually the studio of Walter de Maria. And so he fully renovated it, and you can see sort of major work. So he's a big collector of Basquiat. I believe he sold one of his Basquiats for $100 million. Which I'm sure...
It's a basket full of money.
Yeah, basket full of money, that's right. And so this represents a a sort of a private museum and something which is a little bit off the beaten track, and one of the sort of venues that we're quite interested in visiting. Okay, so we're now going to leave Manhattan and move across to Queens, where we've got MoMA PSI. So MoMA PSI has got an interesting history. It was actually founded in 1971 as the Institute for Art and Urban Resources. And essentially what they focused on was actually acquiring sort of vacant and underutilized buildings and turning them into studios and exhibition spaces for artists, and all over New York. And I think in 1997, this building came up, which they acquired, and following a renovation, they turned it into a art museum. And it includes also an outdoor gallery, and it includes a sort of double height space internally as well as this new entry. So they have a large collection of over 200,000 pieces, and this is also similar to the new museum, focusing on emerging artists. And so you can see from the slides that we'll show you next about the demographic, because they also have a lot of events, so performances, music events, and also they sponsor a young architects activity. So this blue structure you can see there is one of the constructs that young architects have made. And as you can see from the next slide, you can see some of the exhibitions they have, again, very edgy exhibitions, and you can see both the performances and what's going on in the outdoor space, and all young people. But they also happen to have a James Turrell Sky Room as a part of their facility. And and this just adds to the sort of diversity of the type of institution and museums that you have there. So I suppose if you to look at equivalent in Melbourne, this would be a little bit like Gertrude Street, which does the same thing, promoting young emerging artists. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so now we are actually transitioning to commercial galleries. So one of the things about commercial galleries in New York is they've probably got the major commercial galleries in the world located there, and they put on exhibitions which are outstanding. They're museum quality by internationally renowned artists, and it's always worth going there to have a look, because you see some amazing art. And it's also free to get in. And this is an example. This is an exhibition that we went to when we were there in 2016. It was a knockout. So I'll let Leah wax lyrical over this.
Well, the Gagosian Gallery is set up by a guy called Larry Gagosian. He's probably the behemoth art dealer in the world today. He's probably the most powerful art person in the art world, I would imagine. He started in 1980 in Los Angeles, and now has got a global sort of empire of employing more than 300 people at 18 exhibition sort of spaces across the United States, Europe and Asia. In his Upper East Side flagship gallery, it's home to arts of most revered and expensive sort of names like Pablo Picasso, Damien Hirst, Roy Lichtenstein, Andy Warhol, Jackson Pollock, just to name a few. He's really quite an innovator, because in fact he was one of the first to begin having a digital marketplace with innovative online viewing rooms timed to coincide with major art fairs. So he's always been ahead of the pack. This is a guy who studied literature at UCLA University. So he's come a long way. They've become major publishers, and he's also very concerned about preserving the legacy of all his artists. It's interesting to note from about 2008 onwards, buyers from Russia and other republics of the former Soviet Union accounted for almost 50% of total global sales of Gagosian. It's amazing the wealth you can accumulate in a post-communist regime. But today it's probably more likely that the UAE and the Saudis are the major investors, or should I say perhaps launderers, I don't know. Museums and galleries are emerging in these countries that now recognise the power of cultural tourism. Gagosian clears $1 billion in sales annually. It's eye-watering stuff. I mean, with 6 New York galleries, 3 in London, 2 in Paris, 3 in Switzerland, 1 in each of Beverly Hills, Rome, Athens, and Hong Kong. He seems to know where the money is, and he's got the market really absolutely cornered. So this exhibition that we came to was an exhibition of Richard Serra's work. When we spoke to the director there, she said that they actually had the gallery was set up so they could actually take on large works, and he is a great supporter of Serra. But in fact, the gallery had to have walls removed at hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of construction costs in order to bring in this particular artwork. Serra is known for his steel or sort of monoliths, I suppose. They're monumental kind of works, and they look quite forbidding. In Bilbao, it was one of the first works that was installed there was a Richard Serra work, and there's something quite strangely serene, strangely intimate when you're sort of wandering inside these columns that is counterintuitive because they look so brutalist and so severe. But I can't imagine it in our lounge rooms somehow, is all I can say.
I think our floor would collapse.
I think everything would collapse.
I mean, when you look at these slabs, they're sort of like a foot thick and they are solid steel. Yes. So you can imagine how much they weigh. And but it was really quite awesome. But
I mean, he collects all manner of artists. So on the lower right side, you can see the Damien Hirst, which is probably worth several squillion dollars. The Gerhard Richter.
Top right.
On the top right, and on the left-hand side is an artist called Theaster Gates, who is a Black African artist who started as a potter and now deals with the ideas of memory. So he talks about his practice being to try and think about how you can actually retain things. So if it was a hardware store, he said, would you do a replica of the hardware store, or would you use the elements of the hardware store to sort of recreate something? This is very much about the idea of library and the use of, or the absence of books in people's homes, and he's paying homage to it in this particular quite severe looking work. One of the things I suppose you have to give Guggenheim credit for is that they really do support their artists in a very protected way. But I suppose they're protecting their golden egg, aren't they?
I think the artists are supporting Guggenheim more, actually, to that extent. I mean, Guggenheim is so big that he, in some ways, that people accuse him of almost controlling the market.
And I think he's up for a lot of tax kind of issues too.
No, he's not. He's clean at the moment, I believe.
At the moment. If you go to the Upper East Side Gallery, it's worth going up. It's I can't remember the name of the building, but anyway, you go up onto the 5th floor. The galleries are free to go to, and you see some extraordinary art. And I wouldn't worry about the sort of stuffiness of the gallery attendants. After all, they're working and you're on holiday, so stick it. It doesn't really matter. But it's really worthwhile going to any of the Guggenheims because they're always going to have something that is outstanding.
In fact, all these commercial galleries we present are worth going to. This is another one by David Zwerner. He's also a major international gallerist. Can you? And what you'll see now is that some of these galleries have actually purpose-built some major facilities for themselves, and he's got three. David Zwerner's got 3 galleries in New York, and he's got one each in London, Hong Kong, and Paris. This one was built in 2013, which we actually managed to go there when we were there. And as you can see, there's a variety of spaces. So he's got this large gallery space on the ground floor, which is sort of double height space, and then this L-shaped building with a variety of smaller gallery spaces. So there's a sort of variety and diversity of exhibition experiences that you can have there. And it's beautifully detailed, sort of in off-form concrete with timber imprints on the outside and on the inside as well. And although they have a lift there, most people use the stairs to actually circulate going up and down the stairs. And he has some serious artists. So on the top 2 slides, you can see there's an exhibition of Donald Judd, who's a major international artist. And on the bottom right-hand corner, there's
Yayoi Kusama.
Yayoi Kusama's Infinity Room, which was specially set up. This is normally set up in a museum, but you can see it here at David Zwerner. And on top right-hand slide, you can see there's an amazingly immersive light installation by
Doug Wheeler, not
by Doug
Turrell.
Wheeler, and it's not by Turrell. So you can see that there is some fantastic art experiences that you can get from these facilities. We come to another one, the Hauser and Wirth. They are actually international gallerists who are actually Swiss. So they've got 14 galleries around the world, 3 in Zurich and 2 in New York. And this has also been purpose-built. This is by Seldorf Architects, who did not only this building, but also the Zwerner building, and they also are working on the Frick extension. So they actually represent some major international artists, and they represent about 80 artists around the world. So you can see here, this is sort of like a 5-story building. So there's a major gallery space on the ground floor and also one on the top floor. And the top floor one actually can take major installations, which actually bring in by crane and to bring it in through the roof. So you can see that space in the bottom right-hand corner. So these are sort of typical white box type gallery spaces with a variety of art. So again, if you come to these galleries, you'll actually see artists that you've never heard of before. And so it's worth checking them out when you go to New York. This is another one, Pace Gallery. This is also an American gallerist, and he's got nine locations worldwide, 2 in New York. It was originally founded in Boston, and in 2019 they built this 8-story facility, which is their headquarters, and it's about 6,500 square meters, which is a big facility for a gallery. So you can see the sort of money that these galleries turn over, that they can actually afford to create these type of facilities. And what's interesting about this one, they've got this large open deck on the 6th floor, which is designed for art installation, external art installations. They also represent some sort of serious artists. So on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see an installation by Klaus Oldenburg. And this one we haven't seen because this has been built post our last visit. And this is the last commercial gallery that we'll see. This is Spirone and Westwater. They also started in Soho in 1975, and the first show they had was with Carl Andre. So this is in the Lower East Side, and it's on a tiny site. It's only sort of 25 foot wide, and you can see the plan in the bottom middle slide there. And they appointed an international star architect, Norman Foster, to design this building. And I suppose one of the differentiating elements of this building is this red box, which actually floats up in the front facade there, which is actually a lift room, what they call a lift room. It's actually a room that goes up and down like a lift, and in it are sort of art displays, and you can see in the section it connects the sort of 1st to the 5th floor, and it's got a variety of gallery spaces. And and they suggested that the lift installation was actually a piece of kinetic art. So they represent some major artists like...
That's it on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so on the top left-hand side, you can see the lift room, which has been decked out in an art installation. And on the bottom right-hand side, you can see work by
Richard
Long, and in the middle is Bruce Nauman, which are 2 of the artists that they represent. Okay, so now we come to the auction houses. So there are...
And we mention them because, in fact, they're accessible.
Yeah, they're
not
also...
because you're going to go and buy anything.
Yeah, well, you can buy something.
Yeah, no,
but the 2 biggest auction houses, both Sotheby's and Christie's, which we'll cover here, both were actually started in London. So Sotheby's was founded in 1744. But it was bought out by the Americans in 1983 and headquartered in New York. And but now it's actually owned by a French-Israeli businessman called Nathan Drahi. And so what you have is both the 2 major auction houses are now privately owned, and that is a concern for some people because, as Leah said, there's a lot of money laundering and shonky practices taking place in the art world, and because they're private, then they don't have to be, they can be quite opaque in the way they operate. And I actually read in the paper today that Sotheby's were actually lost a legal case that they were aiding and abetting one of their client in tax avoidance. And so that's interesting to see what they'll wash out there. But one of the good things is that these auction houses deal with art that goes back to old masters right through to decorative arts, to modern art and contemporary art. So you can see quite a diversity of work in their showrooms. And if you can catch a sort of major auction that's going to take place and to visit there beforehand, it's well worth it. In this particular case, they appointed OMA to revamp their premises, which you can see. So again, this is well worth a visit. And Christie's. Christie's is also was founded in 1766 in Britain, and it's now owned by French billionaire Francois Morrowlette, who is, I think, currently worth about 50 billion US.
He only picked up about 10 billion over the COVID year.
Yeah. So that actually it was started by his father, Francois Morrowlette, and so their business is basically in luxury brands. So the sort of brands that they have is sort of Gucci and Saint Laurent, Alexander McQueen, Puma, and they also have some major watch and wine, and they also have a huge art collection. I think Pinot is probably one of the biggest collectors of art in the world, and in fact now has 3 private museums. 2 are in Venice, which we covered in our previous talks, which are on our website, and a new one in Paris, which has just opened. So in Paris, he actually took over the Bourse, the Commerce, and converted it into a private museum to show his artwork. So you can see some of the works that Christie's sells. So in the bottom left-hand slide, you can see, I think, that's a Malevich, I think it's a Brancusi, and I think it's a Bacon.
And I think it's a Jean Arp.
And Leah thinks it's John Arp, so we didn't look it up, and Liechtenstein, and they are located in the Rockefeller Center, which is a worthwhile building to have a look at in its own right. And so just some of the recent sales, just to give you an idea about the sort of money that's washing through Christie's. So I think in 2021, during COVID, this basket sold for 93 million, and its estimate was actually 50 million. And in 2017, the de Kooning, the next work along, that sold for 66 million, and that was estimated to be 40. But I think the kicker is the second from the right, the Salvador Mundi, which is a work which is attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, and not everyone is 100% agreed that it is a Leonardo work, but obviously close enough is good enough, because there are not that many Leonardos around, and someone paid an astounding $450 million. This is all in US. And
that's someone.
And that someone is reputed to be the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia. Who's been, don't say this. Has been accused of many things, and you sometimes wonder why they would actually spend that money or that amount of money. But I think the next one even puts that conceptually to shame. For 69 million, they actually sold quite recently by an artist called Beeple. Which is, it's actually a digital print, and it's a collage of 5,000 images that the artist posted online since 2007. And the reason someone paid 69 million for a work is I think up to then he was selling works for probably, I think a few years ago, the top price he got for a work of art was $100. And so this is an NFT.
You can fool some of the people all of the time.
So an NFT is a non-fungible token. And so what that is, it's actually a unique file that lives on blockchain, which can actually verify authenticity. And so it's a little bit like you can buy a record today, or LP or CD or something, but if you own the original, the absolute original, then it has a total different value proposition. And this is what NFTs are doing. So it's a bit nuts, actually.
It's a bit tulip fever.
And the person who bought this was actually an Indian magnate who actually business is in cryptocurrency. So actually cryptocurrency is a currency form of NFTs. No, it's not. It's blockchain. currency, and
that's perfect synergy, isn't it?
so he actually paid for this in cryptocurrency. So it's bullshit art bought by bullshit currency, right?
To use a technical term.
Yeah, to use a technical term, yeah. So, okay, so Leah, this is your favourite building?
My favourite building. So this is going out of town. We had friends who were wonderful and actually took us on a fantastic drive, but I think you can get here by train. So this is located in the fabled Hamptons region, the Portsea on steroids kind of place on Long Island's East End, where many artist studios could be located. It's about a 90-minute drive and takes you away from the whole traffic congested city to this serene dune and shrub landscape. And you know, Manhattanites will often just escape here for the weekend, but I think they spend most of their time on the freeway because it's so congested, that run. This this elongated double-pitched gable-roofed barn is actually a state-of-the-art facility designed by Charlie's favourite architects.
Not favourite,
well,
one of my favourites.
They're distinguished Swiss architects Herzog and de Meuron, and they've designed it to house a hive-like arrangement of 10 galleries, which kind of mimics the artist studios of that particular region. Artists used to come to this particular space to this area. It was the first in the late 19th century. It was the first place for en plein air kind of artworks because the light was so particularly good. And this museum is actually displaying works of art, works on paper that have been amassed over its 115-year history. And they actually really are trying to champion artists that actually worked in that particular area. They've got artists like Dan Flavin, William de Kooning, Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, all lived and worked in that particular area. And so a major focus of their artworks happened to be of those particular artists. I found the building so, I was so excited to come here. I found the building so sterile and banal, and it didn't do me. What I loved was going to a little town called Southampton, which is a very, it's the local kind of, I suppose it's like a Sorrento, I would imagine. It's a Sorrento of that particular region where the locals will come. And so it's this lovely, vibrant little coastal village, which is really lovely. But I have to say, I didn't find the museum talk to me at all. I was particularly disappointed. I mean, you can see it's set in the landscape. It's trying to mimic something, but I sometimes think the theory actually overwhelms the practice. Is all I can say. And I just didn't grab it. It didn't grab me. Yes, the inside has colour and light and north light and love, but you know,
it's hard to imagine I'm married to an architectural philistine, isn't it? So this is my life. I have to live with a person like this, right? So. All right, look, it's not my favourite Herzog de Meuron building, I'll admit, but it has some wonderful qualities. And one is that they actually were playing on the sort of vernacular of that area and the fact that it's a farming area and the sort of shed-like type buildings. And but some of the spaces are really gorgeous and the quality of the gallery spaces are great.
I mean, internally, I must say.
And they have some great art there and definitely well worth a visit. It's beautifully lit. You can see from the skylights. I think Leah's disappointment is that the cafe didn't come up to scratch.
No, it wasn't open. I was really cranky. We've been driving for a long time. I was hanging out for something. I think that probably must have coloured my artistic judgment, yeah. I'm sure.
I think architectural taste is sort of dependent on when she's eaten last. So,
but yes, but worth going out to Southampton to the village. It's where, you know, a very affluent community tends to sort of shop and be, and it's interesting in its own right too.
Okay, so now this is where Leah's in her.
I always need my greens when we travel, and Charles is a concrete man, big time. So Storm King is really a must.
So this is in a different area. This is in the Hudson Valley, which is in another direction, which is north rather than east.
And also took about 19 minutes to travel out of Manhattan. And it's fantastic to stand in a field and actually look back onto the island of Manhattan. And you see the sculptural set of sort of skyscrapers. But the sculpture here was actually specifically designed to sit in this open air museum of 500 acres. I mean, it's absolutely huge. You have to have a car. I think they do a shuttle bus. When we were there, we self-drove around, but I think by now they have shuttle buses that take you around. They have limited, restricted sort of parking. But it's really quite, really, it's quite extraordinary, really quite extraordinary. The works that you can see there on the top left-hand side is a sculptor I've not heard of called Mark de Savuro, and the submerged house is by a sculptor called Alice Laycock. On the left lower side is a work which I love, is by a sculptor called Menashe Kadishman, and some of you may be familiar with him. He did the installation at the Jüdische Historische Museum in Berlin with the small shoes in the Holocaust Museum, the faces that were these metal pieces inside this sort of angular gallery. That's one of Menashe Kadishman's other works. And on the left-hand side is a work by the right-hand side, I beg your pardon, the red work is by a sculptor called Alexander Liberman. They're hugely scaled works. They're set there. This is not a temporary installation. When the works are sort of placed, that's where they stay. The central space is an original building that was there that is used as it wasn't open when we were there, as probably a gift shop and an information kind of space.
It's a museum as well.
And is it as a museum? I didn't know that. But you can see how breathtaking the landscape is around it. And we were there actually when it happened to be autumn, which is their fall. I mean, just the leaves, nature in itself is actually glorious. So the work on the top left-hand side is by an artist called Maya Lin. You may be familiar with her. She designed the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. And it's a beautiful undulating bit of land art. On the extreme right-hand side is a work with stones and trees by another land artist, Andrew Goldsworthy, who's done a huge amount of work all over the world, really quite beautiful. On the lower level, on the right and left-hand side, the black and the red work are works by Alexander Calder, and the stonework is by Noguchi, and then the jutting out protrusion is by Richard Serra. They're really, the scale of the works is extraordinary, the scale of the space is extraordinary, and it's a really wonderful counterpoint to the urban jungle that is New York, and it's really worth the joy. If we can't get to New York for a long time, and the New Zealand bubble opens up, I do urge you, and many of you may have well gone there, to go to Gibbs Farm in New Zealand. It's a huge sculpture park that has the largest works by Richard Serra, by Andy Goldsworthy, by, I'm just trying to think of some of the artists that are there. Anish Kapoor. It's a spectacular, it opens once a month, it's free, you have to register online. You've got to stump around in gumboots. There's no toilet, there's no gift shop, there's nothing, it's just sculpture, and you get this 360-degree view around. It is absolutely exquisite. So I urge you to check that out, because New York may be a step too far at the moment.
Yeah, but in Melbourne, we've got something similar on a mini scale, which is McClellan Gallery. They've got an outdoor sculpture park associated with their museum as well. So that's worth a visit if you want to have that sort of outdoor experience.
And we're in our last destination, I think, finally. You've been hanging in there, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so this is also in the Hudson Valley. This is on the Hudson River, and this is Deer Beacon. So Deer, which we saw in Chelsea, they were looking for a facility, and they found this disused Nabisco box factory, which was in Beacon. And I think, to give you some idea as to what a comparison is like Warburton. Warburton, similar countryside, and there they had a sanitarium factory, which I'm not sure, I don't think is working anymore. And this is the example where you had a major industry which supported the town, which actually ceased operation. The town went into decline. And when Deer took this over, and it was the perfect building for what they wanted to do, as you'll see from the slides, it sort of revitalized the town. And a lot of artists have moved there, as has happened here in the country, because they can't afford the rents in the city. And so they got a sort of vibrant artist community. And in fact, one of the artists that we collect, Peter Davrington, has got a studio and lives in Beacon, and we visited him when we went there. We've been to Beacon twice, and we sort of make a point of going there because it's just a fantastic facility.
Well, the journey itself, I mean, you get the Amtrak train from Grand Central Station, you've got this 1.5 hour beautiful train ride along
especially
the
in autumn when all the trees are in the colourful leaf.
And I think it's a 5 or 10 minute walk from the station.
So it's very convenient. So very much, if you've got the time to just take a day out to go to Deer Beacon. So you can see on the bottom left hand side, one of the things about this building is that basically they didn't do much to it. They sort of just painted the walls, all the skylights.
There's no artificial light.
Yeah, all the skylights are naturally lit. And the gallery space is so vast. I think it's about 15,000 square meters, one of the largest exhibition spaces in a museum in America. And they can actually allocate rooms to an artist or to a genre of art. And so you go from these spaces, which are really quite cohesive in the way they present the works. And even the floors, I believe, are original. They've just been sort of buffed up. So on the left you have the Warhol, on the right you've got a Dan Flavin, so with his light works, and in the sort of basement area or undercroft area they've got this green fluorescent installation, and you can see Leah there, overawed by the lighting experience.
Well, it was like a luminous forest. Yeah, it's quite extraordinary.
It's like a disco without the music.
Oh, is that what you think?
Yeah. So you can see here, so here you have some of the artists that we've seen before. So on the top left-hand side, you can see this space which has been devoted to Donald Judd, and on the bottom, a space devoted to Carl Andre. In the top middle, there's a space that Sol LeWitt, and on the top right hand and the bottom middle, you can see a work by Robert Smithson. And on the right hand side, there's the work with these sort of mashed up car bodies, which by John Chamberlain. Fantastic art, fantastic spaces, and some of the work is really monumental. So one of the things that Dia also wants to do is that they part of the facility here is changing it, but a lot of them are permanent, because a lot of these artists like Donald Judd, they wanted their work set up permanently because they saw their work as being permanent installation, not temporary installations. And so you can see in the top middle slide is this work by Michael Heiser, where they've cut these huge holes into the ground, which have been steel lined with, I think, a square, circle, rectangle, and triangle, which are sort of the basic shapes. And
doesn't that remind you of now the New York Times, the World Trade?
There's no water there though.
No, but it's evocative of that sort of infinite space.
So it's sort of this concept of negative space. So a lot of this work is very conceptual. And on the left-hand side, you've got this amazing monumental rock, which has been inserted into the wall, which is also steel lined, and you can see the scale of it relative to me. And again, it sort of plays with that idea with this sort of natural made contrasting or juxtaposed against something that's man-made. On the bottom, you've got this huge space which has got this red carpet with these works by Walter de Maria, and you can see Richard Serra on the right-hand side and Gerhard Richter on the left-hand side. Amazing facility and highly recommended, and even though we've seen a lot of it ourselves, we always try to make an effort to go there just for the sort of experience. Okay, so I think that comes to the end.